She moved through the crowded school hallway with quiet determination, her wheelchair gliding smoothly over the worn tiles. She had learned to navigate these hallways better than anyone, anticipating obstacles, weaving between groups of students and always keeping her eyes on the goal, her next class. Despite her disability, she carried herself with a calm confidence, one that came from years of learning how to stand strong in a world that often underestimated her. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long, warm lines across the floor. She paused briefly to glance out at the schoolyard. Students were scattered across the playground, some laughing, some talking in small groups, others lost in their phones. She could see the familiar faces of her classmates she liked and some she didn't. It wasn't that she disliked people, but she had learned to be cautious. Some looked at her differently because of her disability, and some looked at her differently because of the color of her skin. She had faced both quietly, holding her head high and refusing to let others' judgments define her. Her backpack rested securely on the back of her wheelchair, filled with textbooks and notebooks. She had spent the weekend studying, and today she felt prepared. Her mind was focused on her classes, her dreams, and the life she wanted to build for herself. She didn't have time to be distracted by people who thought they could push her around. But as she turned the corner, she spotted the usual trouble waiting. A small group of students leaned against the lockers, whispering and snickering. She recognized them immediately. They were the ones who always found her the easiest target. They didn't know much about her, but they assumed weakness where there was none. Their smirks were familiar, but so was her ability to remain unfazed. Still, her stomach tightened. She had faced them before, and she knew what they were capable of. They noticed her too. Their laughter stopped abruptly, and their eyes followed her every move. One of them, the tallest and loudest, stepped forward slightly, blocking her path. "Well, look who it is," he said with a sneer, leaning closer. "Thought you could just roll through here without anyone noticing." She didn't reply. Words were often weapons, but she preferred to keep her focus and not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She slowed slightly, giving them space to move if they wanted to, but keeping her posture strong, shoulders back, chin up. She had learned that bullies often lost their power when met with calm confidence. The second one snorted, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You think you're tough? Just 'cause you roll around like that?" he taunted. The third, smaller but equally mean-spirited, laughed, nudging the tallest with his elbow. "Yeah, she won't even see us coming." They all laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the lockers. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not out of fear, but from the awareness of what was coming. They were testing her, pushing boundaries, hoping she would react with anger or fear. She had learned long ago that controlling her emotions was her strongest defense. If she stayed calm, they had nothing. If she panicked, they won. But she could feel the tension building, a storm just below the surface. A teacher was passing by, but her gaze was distracted by papers in her hand. She didn't notice what was about to unfold. The hall was busy enough that the bullying could happen quickly and quietly, yet loud enough that some students would watch, unsure whether to intervene. It was always this way, a mix of fear, hesitation, and curiosity from those around them. One of the bullies suddenly leaned forward, trying to intimidate her by blocking the wheelchair. "Hey, stop right there," he shouted. She stopped, holding her position. Her hands rested lightly on the wheels, ready to maneuver but not to rush. She had trained herself in careful movements in anticipation of unexpected situations. She had to act smart and she had to act fast. "What are you gonna do, huh?" he taunted, leaning closer and trying to get a reaction. She looked him straight in the eye, holding her gaze firmly. She refused to shrink back. "Nothing I need to do," she said quietly, her voice steady, almost soft, yet carrying a weight he did not expect. "You can move aside or I'll move around you." Her words were calm, measured, and carried a quiet confidence that unsettled him for a moment. He blinked, surprised at her composure. The other two looked at each other, unsure of how to react. They had never been met with this kind of calm assertiveness. It was new to them, and that uncertainty gave her a small edge. But they weren't ready to give up yet. "Move aside? Or what?" the tallest one barked, trying to regain control. "You think you can scare us?" His voice was loud, but there was a hint of nervousness now, a crack in his previously confident demeanor. She shifted slightly, moving her wheelchair a few inches, signaling that she could maneuver around them if needed. I don't need to scare you. I just need to get to class. The choice is yours. Step aside or I move through. Her tone was firm and her eyes were steady. She wasn't threatening. She was stating a fact. For a few seconds, there was silence. The hallway noise seemed to fade as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Some students glanced over, sensing that a confrontation was about to unfold. There was curiosity in their eyes, but also caution. No one wanted to get involved unless absolutely necessary. The smallest bully, trying to play the peacemaker but still wanting to look tough, stepped back slightly. "She's not worth it," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction. The tallest one's hand twitched slightly as if he wanted to lunge forward, to assert dominance, but he hesitated. She could see it. She could see the uncertainty in their movements, the way their confidence was wavering. She took another slow, deliberate breath. Staying calm was essential. Her heart was beating faster, but she controlled it, grounding herself in the knowledge that she was capable of defending herself if necessary. Years of experience had prepared her for this moment. She knew she could not rely on others to protect her, so she relied on her own skill and composure. The bell rang for the next class, echoing through the hallway. It was a sound of change, a sound that could end the confrontation if timed right. She saw an opportunity. She moved her wheelchair smoothly, navigating just enough to signal that she could pass. Her posture remained strong and her gaze never wavered from the tallest bully. He stepped forward, trying to block her path again, but this time she was ready. With a gentle yet firm movement, she maneuvered her wheelchair around him, maintaining balance and control. The motion was precise, practiced, and unexpected. The sudden action startled him, causing him to stumble slightly. The other two flinched, unsure how to react. There was a brief moment of shock, a pause where the hall seemed to hold its breath. She continued forward, not with haste but with deliberate control. Her expression was calm, almost serene as she passed them. She didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat. She simply moved on, asserting her space and her dignity. Some students whispered to each other, impressed by her courage. Others stared, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The bullies themselves were momentarily speechless, caught off guard by her unexpected skill and calm demeanor. Their plan to intimidate her had failed, and the realization hung heavy in the air. She didn't look back. She focused on the next turn, the next classroom, the next part of her day. She didn't need approval or praise. Her confidence came from within, from knowing her own strength and the knowledge that she could handle herself in any situation. The bullies would remember this moment, even if they tried to deny it later. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would linger. As she entered her classroom, she took a deep breath and settled in. The morning sunlight illuminated the room, casting a warm glow across the desks. She felt a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced the challenge and she had emerged unshaken. Her focus returned to her studies, to the lessons ahead, and to the life she was determined to build for herself. Outside the window, students moved about in the courtyard. The world continued, indifferent to the small battles fought in the hallways. Yet for her, every challenge she overcame, every moment she asserted her dignity, was a step toward the person she knew she could be. She was strong, capable, and unyielding. And though the bullies waited, she was ready for whatever came next, confident that her courage and skill would see her through. The hallway felt heavier now. Even though she had successfully moved past the first confrontation, the presence of the bullies still lingered in her mind. She could hear their footsteps echoing behind her, their whispers carrying just enough to let her know they were plotting. She didn't panic. Years of experience had taught her that staying calm was more powerful than rushing or showing fear. She adjusted her posture in the wheelchair, her hands gripping the wheels lightly but ready for quick action if needed. The school bell had rung, but the students' movement around her slowed as they sensed tension. Some were watching from a distance, curious. Others were too involved in their own world to notice. The bullies were closing in, and she could feel their gaze burning on her back. She didn't need to turn around to know their intentions. Their energy alone told the story. One of the bullies, the tallest one, finally called out, "Hey, wait up." His voice was sharp, challenging. He took a step closer, attempting to match her pace. She didn't accelerate. She knew provoking them could lead to unnecessary trouble. Instead, she measured her movements carefully, calculating how she could use her wheelchair to maneuver safely. Every inch of space mattered. The second bully, who had been quieter, now joined in. "Why are you always so serious? Lighten up for once," he mocked. His attempt to sound casual was hollow, and she could see the tension in his hands. He didn't know what she was capable of, and the uncertainty made him jittery. The smallest one followed closely, his eyes darting around, almost looking for a teacher to intervene so he wouldn't be the one in trouble. She finally stopped near a cluster of lockers, pretending to fumble with her backpack. It was a trick, a way to gauge how close they were willing to get. The bullies took the bait. They laughed, leaning in, trying to intimidate her further. One of them reached out, pushing the side of her wheelchair lightly, testing her reaction. It was enough to disturb her balance slightly, but she recovered quickly, keeping her hands steady on the wheels. "Watch it," she said calmly. Her voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to yell or threaten. It was enough to make the tallest one pause for a fraction of a second. That fraction was all she needed. They didn't pause long. Confidence often returns quickly when they believe they still have control. The tallest one leaned forward, smirking. "Or what? You gonna roll away and cry?" He tried to sound tough, but the edge in his voice betrayed uncertainty. The second one snickered nervously, and the third shifted from foot to foot. Clearly uncomfortable, she knew that ignoring them wouldn't work. They needed to feel her presence, not her fear, but they also needed to be stopped before it escalated. She took a deep breath and adjusted her hands on the wheels, preparing to act if necessary. She had trained for moments like this, and although it wasn't often that she had to use her skills at school, she was ready. Suddenly, the tallest bully moved aggressively, trying to block her path. This time she didn't hesitate. Using her knowledge of her wheelchair and her own strength, she maneuvered quickly, shifting the chair to the side with precision. She leaned slightly to the right, guiding the wheels against the floor in a controlled motion that unbalanced the bully just enough to make him stumble backward. He caught himself on a locker, but his confidence wavered. The other two looked at each other in surprise. They hadn't expected her to react so skillfully. Fear started to creep in, though neither wanted to admit it. The balance of power had shifted, and for a moment, she was the one in control. Her calmness and intelligence were weapons as strong as any physical strength. The hallway had begun to fill with whispers. Students nearby were starting to notice the tension, sensing that something unusual was happening. She didn't need anyone to intervene, but the awareness that others were watching added a subtle pressure. She had to handle this with grace, not just for herself, but to maintain her dignity in front of witnesses. The tallest one attempted another move, reaching out as if to push her wheelchair again. She anticipated it perfectly. With a swift, controlled motion, she shifted the chair slightly backward, causing him to stumble again. This time he nearly lost his balance entirely and had to grip the locker with both hands to steady himself. The second bully gasped, and the smallest one's mouth opened slightly in shock. Their confidence was crumbling. She didn't speak, didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her calm, precise movement said everything without words. She had faced bigger challenges than this, and her training, combined with years of experience navigating a world that often underestimated her, gave her the advantage. Every motion was intentional, every tilt calculated. For the first time, one of the bullies tried to retreat. The smallest one muttered something under his breath and took a step back. The second one hesitated, unsure whether to stay or follow. The tallest one, still grasping the locker, looked at her with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The realization hit him. She was not someone to push around. She was skilled, composed, and ready. The hall seemed to grow quieter as the tension peaked. Some students in the distance whispered, others watched in awe. No one had expected this outcome. The bullies had thought they could dominate, but their plan was unraveling. She remained still, poised, letting them make the next move while maintaining complete control of the situation. Suddenly, the tallest one lunged forward, trying one last time to intimidate her. She anticipated it, shifting the chair slightly to the side and using her momentum to guide him past her without contact. He stumbled, tripping over his own feet and landing on the floor with a loud thud. The other two froze, horrified and unsure whether to help or run. For a moment, there was silence. broken only by the echo of his fall and the murmur of nearby students. She didn't move. She simply sat in her wheelchair, composed, her gaze steady. She had defended herself without needing to yell or retaliate violently. The bullies were left disoriented, humiliated, and completely unprepared for what had just happened. The second bully, still standing, shook his head, trying to regain his composure. He looked at the tallest one on the floor and then at her, realizing that their plan to intimidate her had failed miserably. The smallest one, nervously shifting his weight, finally spoke, almost whispering. We shouldn't have done this," he said, more to himself than anyone else. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her point had been made. Strength was not about being loud or violent. It was about control, skill, and calm determination. She had taught them a lesson without lowering herself to their level. Their confidence was shattered, and the balance of power had shifted completely. Some students began to gather around, watching, some in awe, some in disbelief. Teachers started to notice, heading in their direction as they heard the commotion. She remained composed, knowing that soon the situation would be addressed properly by authority figures. She had handled herself perfectly up to this point, and now it was up to others to respond appropriately. The bell rang again, signaling the next class. It was a relief, a chance to move on, but she knew the bullies would not forget this. She had proven something important. No one should underestimate her, and she would stand her ground when needed. Her confidence, calmness, and skill were more than enough to face any challenge. As she slowly maneuvered toward her classroom, she noticed some students whispering to each other, nodding in admiration. The feeling was subtle, but powerful. She didn't seek recognition, but it was a reminder that courage and intelligence often leave an impact beyond the immediate moment. She could feel the shift in the hallway energy. The bullies, still shaken, were no longer a looming threat. She had taken control of the situation without losing her dignity or composure. She arrived at her classroom, taking a deep breath and settling in. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the desks and creating a warm atmosphere. She felt calm and centered. The confrontation was over, but it had left a mark, not on her, but on those who had tried to intimidate her. They had learned, as they would never forget, that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest, most composed person is the strongest of all. She opened her notebook and began to take notes, letting her mind focus on the lesson ahead. The bullies were out there, but they were no longer in control. She had faced them, shown her strength, and maintained her dignity. That was victory enough. The day continued, the hallways filled with chatter, laughter, and movement. But she moved through it with the confidence of someone who knew her own power and wasn't afraid to stand firm when challenged. By the time the lunch bell rang, the tension from the morning had not completely faded. She moved carefully through the crowded cafeteria, maneuvering her wheelchair between tables filled with students. She had learned to anticipate the movements of others, weaving through the chaos without drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Despite the earlier confrontation, she remained calm, focused on her own world and her own pace. She found a quiet spot near the window, where she could sit and observe without being in the center of the crowd. She placed her tray on the table, the familiar routine bringing a sense of comfort. The sunlight streaming in highlighted the vibrant colors of the cafeteria, making it feel warmer and less threatening than the hallway earlier. Even so, she knew that some challenges were not over yet. The bullies had been shaken, but that did not mean they were done. Some people never learned unless they faced consequences they couldn't ignore. She ate slowly, keeping her mind alert. Her eyes scanned the room occasionally, noting who was around, where the bullies might be, and how the students were behaving. There was a strange mix of curiosity and caution in the air. Students whispered in small groups, some glancing at her in the empty space nearby where the bullies had been momentarily humbled. Their whispers carried hints of admiration and surprise, but also the uncertainty of those who hadn't yet seen her true strength. The bell rang again, signaling the end of lunch, and she prepared to leave. She moved to stand near the exit, ready to navigate the busy hallways once more. She knew that confidence. Alone sometimes wasn't enough. Being ready for action was equally important. Her hands rested lightly on the wheels of her chair, but her mind was active, anticipating the next move from the bullies, even though she hoped they would leave her alone. It didn't take long for the tension to resurface. She noticed the 3 students approaching from the other side of the cafeteria. Their expressions had changed since the morning. The tallest one had a scowl, and his eyes carried both anger and disbelief. The second one seemed more cautious, moving slightly behind the tallest, while the smallest one looked nervous, unsure whether to stay or run. She knew that their pride had been hurt, and pride often made people act foolishly. They stepped into her path, blocking the way to the door. "We're not done yet," the tallest one said, his voice low but full of determination. He leaned forward slightly, trying to intimidate her, but his earlier stumble had left him shaken. The second one fidgeted, unsure how to act, and the smallest shuffled his feet nervously. She didn't respond verbally. She didn't need to. Her calm demeanor, combined with the knowledge of her own strength, spoke louder than any words. She knew how to handle the situation without unnecessary escalation, but she also knew she had to be prepared for their next move. Suddenly, the tallest one lunged forward, attempting to push her wheelchair. She reacted instantly. With precise movements, she shifted her chair, maintaining balance while using the momentum of her body to counter the push. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing again, while the second one froze, unsure what to do. The smallest one flinched, realizing they had underestimated her again. The cafeteria fell into a hush. Some students turned to watch, others whispered quietly to their friends. Teachers were starting to notice, walking closer to assess the situation. She remained composed, letting the bullies make their next move while keeping control of the situation herself. The tallest one recovered quickly, anger flashing in his eyes. He stepped forward again, but this time she was ready. She shifted her wheelchair with skill, using her balance and body movement to guide him past her without contact. He tripped slightly over his own feet, landing uncomfortably against a nearby table. The second one gasped, and the smallest one's mouth opened in shock. Their confidence was cracking, and fear was creeping in. She didn't celebrate, didn't laugh, and didn't shout. She simply sat in her wheelchair, composed, letting her calmness do the work. She had anticipated every move they made, and she had countered each one with control and precision. This wasn't about winning a fight. It was about asserting her dignity and proving that she would not be intimidated. Some students started to murmur in admiration. They were seeing someone who refused to be defined by weakness, someone who faced challenges head-on with intelligence and strength. The energy in the room shifted slightly. The bullies were no longer in control. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced by fear and uncertainty. The tallest one attempted one last move, reaching out aggressively. She anticipated it immediately, leaning slightly to the side and using the chair's momentum to guide him past without contact. He stumbled once more, landing partially on the floor and partially against a table. The second and smallest ones froze, unable to process what had just happened. The room was silent, the tension palpable. For a few moments, no one spoke. The bullies were disoriented. Their plan to intimidate her completely failed. She remained seated, calm and composed, her gaze steady. She had defended herself without losing control or dignity. Her skill, preparation, and calmness had been enough to neutralize the threat. Teachers finally arrived, assessing the situation quickly. They separated the bullies, ensuring no further conflict would occur. She explained calmly what had happened, her words measured and clear. The staff listened carefully, taking note of the bully's behavior and her own response. She had handled herself perfectly, and now the adults were ensuring appropriate consequences would follow. As she was guided toward the next class, she felt a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced intimidation and handled it with intelligence and strength. The bullies had learned a lesson, not through anger or retaliation, but through her composure and skill. She had maintained her dignity and shown that true strength often comes from preparation, focus, and confidence. Her classmates whispered to each other as she passed, some nodding in admiration, others in awe. She didn't seek their attention, but she noticed it nonetheless. Their reactions were subtle but telling. They had witnessed courage, and it left an impression that would not soon fade. The bullies, meanwhile, were left to reflect on their actions, humbled and embarrassed by their failure. She reached her classroom, taking a deep breath and preparing to focus on her studies. The morning had been intense, but she remained unshaken. She understood that life would present challenges, but she also knew that she was equipped to face them. Her confidence, calmness, and preparedness had carried her through, and they would continue to do so. The lesson began, and she immersed herself in her work. The memory of the confrontation lingered, but it was a reminder of her resilience and strength. She was capable, intelligent, and unyielding. The bullies had tested her, and she had shown them that underestimating her was a mistake. Her focus returned to her studies, her mind sharp and alert, ready for whatever else the day might bring. In that quiet strength, she found victory, dignity, and the reassurance that she could handle any challenge with grace and skill. By mid-afternoon, the school hallways had returned to a usual rhythm, but she remained vigilant. She knew the bullies would not forget the morning or lunch incidents easily, and she could sense the tension in the air even if they tried to hide it. Moving carefully through the corridors, she continued to navigate the school with calm focus. Each turn, each step, or rather each push of her wheelchair wheels, was deliberate and measured, as if she could feel the energy of the entire building around her. Her next class was in a part of the school that felt more isolated. The walls were lined with lockers that had seen generations of students pass through, and the fluorescent lights cast a slightly harsh glow over the hallway. She could see shadows moving around corners, and every familiar face she passed reminded her of the balance of school life. Some people friendly, some indifferent, and some dangerous when pushed too far. The three bullies had not made their presence overtly known, but she could sense them nearby. The air carried a certain tension, the kind that comes when someone is planning retaliation, unsure of how it will go. She didn't panic. Her mind was sharp, her body ready. She had learned that staying calm and assessing the situation was far more effective than reacting out of fear. As she approached her classroom, she saw the tallest bully standing by a locker, seemingly waiting. The other two hovered nearby, their eyes flicking toward her with a mix of caution and anger. She stopped briefly, letting them come forward slightly, and then continued, maintaining a steady pace. Her calmness was deliberate, a way to assert control over a situation that could have easily turned chaotic. "Hey, wait," the tallest one called out, his voice sharp but tinged with nervousness. He stepped toward her, attempting to appear intimidating, but his earlier stumbles had left him visibly shaken. The second one shifted uneasily, unsure whether to confront her, while the smallest stayed back, fidgeting nervously. She didn't respond verbally. Her calm, steady gaze said more than words ever could. She had learned to let her composure speak for her, and that was enough to unsettle them. Confidence often works silently, and in this moment it was her strongest tool. The tallest one lunged, hoping to push her wheelchair, but she was ready. With precise movements, she adjusted her chair, maintaining balance while countering the push with a smooth motion. His momentum carried him slightly past her, and he stumbled, barely catching himself on a locker. The other two flinched, unsure of how to react, as the unexpected skill and poise she displayed threw them off. "Not so easy, huh?" she said quietly, her tone calm but firm. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. She didn't need to be loud to make her point. Her composure alone was enough to challenge their arrogance and intimidation. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Students passing by slowed, sensing the tension. Whispers began to spread, some expressing awe, others curiosity. The bullies were no longer in control. Their confidence had been chipped away by her precise and calm reactions. They were learning that she was not someone to underestimate. The second bully took a hesitant step forward, trying to regain some control, but his uncertainty betrayed him. The smallest one shuffled awkwardly, avoiding direct confrontation. The tallest one, still trying to assert dominance, lunged again. She anticipated it immediately, leaning slightly to the side and using the motion of her wheelchair to redirect his momentum. He stumbled once more, this time landing partially on the floor, completely off balance. The other two froze, witnessing his misstep and the consequences of underestimating her. Her calm and calculated actions left the bullies disoriented. They had expected an easy target, someone who would react with fear or anger. Instead, they faced composure and skill that neutralized every attempt to intimidate her. The balance of power had shifted, and they were beginning to realize it. Nearby students were now watching more closely. Some whispered in admiration, others looked on in disbelief. Teachers began to notice the commotion and started moving toward the hallway. She remained poised, knowing that the presence of authority would soon reinforce the consequences of the bully's behavior. The tallest one attempted one final approach, his pride driving him forward despite repeated failures. She anticipated him perfectly, leaning slightly forward and shifting the wheelchair with precision. His momentum carried him past her again, causing him to stumble into the locker and then to the floor with a thud. The second and smallest ones were frozen, their confidence shattered. The hallway was silent for a moment, broken only by the dull sounds of the bully hitting the floor and the whispers of students. Teachers arrived, quickly separating the bullies and ensuring that the situation would be addressed. She calmly explained what had happened, her words clear, precise, and composed. The staff listened carefully, noting both the bully's aggressive behavior and her ability to handle the situation without escalating it further. Her calmness and skill had turned what could have been a chaotic scene into a controlled and instructive one. The bell rang, signaling the next class, and she prepared to leave the hallway. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had faced intimidation and come out unshaken. The bullies had learned a lesson not through violence or anger, but through the quiet power of her composure and intelligence. Her dignity remained intact, and she had maintained control throughout the situation. As she moved toward her classroom, she noticed some students nodding in recognition and subtle admiration. She didn't seek attention, but the acknowledgement was a reminder that courage and strength often speak louder than words. The bullies, meanwhile, were left to reflect on their actions, humbled by the realization that they had misjudged her abilities. She arrived at her classroom, taking a deep breath and preparing to focus on her studies. The morning had been filled with challenges, but she had navigated them successfully. She knew life would continue to present obstacles, but she was confident in her ability to handle them. Her calmness, focus, and skill had carried her through the day, and they would continue to guide her in future challenges. The lesson began, and she immersed herself in her work. The events of the hallway lingered, but they served as a reminder of her resilience and determination. She was capable, intelligent, and unyielding. The bullies had tested her, and she had demonstrated strength and poise that left a lasting impression. Her focus returned to her studies, her mind sharp and alert, ready to continue facing the day with confidence and dignity. Through every push of her wheelchair and every calm decision, she had shown that true strength is measured not by aggression, but by composure, intelligence, and the courage to stand firm when challenged. The last period of the day had begun and the hallways felt quieter. Most students were focused on their lessons or finishing last-minute homework, but the memory of earlier events still lingered in the air. She moved calmly through the corridor, her hands steady on the wheelchair wheels, her mind alert and prepared for anything unexpected. Today had been challenging, but she had proven something to herself and everyone around her, that she would not be intimidated or underestimated. She reached her classroom and carefully positioned herself at her desk, feeling a sense of relief in returning to familiar surroundings. The room was bright with sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the books and papers scattered across the desks. The teacher greeted her with a warm smile, unaware of the events that had unfolded during the day, but sensing the quiet confidence she carried. Her classmates were settling in, and she noticed some of them glancing her way with admiration, respect, or curiosity. She didn't seek their approval, but their acknowledgement was a subtle reminder that courage and dignity can leave a lasting impression. The bullies were absent from the classroom, and she knew that the staff had ensured they would face consequences for their actions. That knowledge brought a quiet satisfaction, though she didn't gloat. She had achieved something more important. She had stood up for herself while maintaining her composure. As the lesson began, she focused on the material, immersing herself in the subject. Her mind had been sharpened by the events of the day, and she found herself concentrating more deeply than ever before. Every word the teacher spoke seemed clearer, and she took notes with precision, her handwriting neat and organized. The sense of control she had experienced in the hallways now extended to her studies, reinforcing her belief in her own capabilities. During a brief break, she glanced around the room. Some students were quietly talking, their whispers hinting at the earlier hallway events. She caught snippets of their conversations, words of admiration and surprise at her calm handling of the bullies. None of it mattered to her directly, but it was a quiet validation of her approach. She had faced fear and intimidation and emerged with strength and dignity intact. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, she packed her belongings methodically. She moved through the hallways with a steady rhythm, her mind alert to any lingering threats or tensions. The bullies were not immediately visible, and she knew that today they had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating others. Confidence can crumble quickly when confronted with unexpected strength, and she had demonstrated that skillfully and calmly. As she exited the school building, the cool afternoon air greeted her. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the pavement. She felt a sense of freedom in the open space, a release from the tension of the day. The events in the hallways had tested her patience, skill, and composure, but she had passed that test with grace. She knew that the bullies might reflect on their actions, humbled and aware that their attempts to intimidate her had failed. She wheeled herself toward the bus stop, her hands steady and confident. Along the way, she noticed a few students whispering among themselves, some giving subtle nods of respect. She didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. Her satisfaction came from knowing she had handled the day with integrity and skill. She had faced fear and aggression without losing her dignity, and that was more important than any recognition. The bullies, somewhere nearby, were likely replaying the events in their minds. They had attempted to assert dominance only to find themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Their pride had been shaken, and their confidence had been challenged in a way they would not forget. She had not attacked them recklessly or sought revenge. She had simply defended herself with calm precision and intelligence. That was the kind of power that left a lasting impression. As she waited for the bus, she reflected on the day's events. She had faced intimidation and emerged unshaken. She had maintained her composure, dignity, and control, proving to herself and others that strength comes in many forms. Her skill, preparation, and calmness had been enough to neutralize the threat, without escalating the situation unnecessarily. The bullies had learned their lesson, not through anger or aggression, but through her quiet and measured approach. When the bus arrived, she wheeled herself carefully onto the vehicle, finding a seat near the window. The ride home was calm, and she allowed herself a small smile. Today had been challenging, but it had also been empowering. She had demonstrated resilience, intelligence, and courage, and those qualities would serve her in countless situations in the future. Her mind replayed the events not with anger or fear, but with a sense of accomplishment and confidence in her abilities. At home, she was greeted by her family with warmth and care. They noticed a subtle change in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that came from facing challenges and emerging stronger. She shared a few details about her day, careful not to dwell on negativity, but emphasizing how she had handled situations calmly and effectively. Her family listened attentively, proud of her resilience and strength. In her room, she reflected further on the lessons of the day. Strength was not always about physical power. It was about intelligence, composure, and confidence. The bullies had tried to assert dominance through fear, but she had countered with strategy, skill, and calm. She had proven that underestimating someone based on appearance, ability, or assumptions was a mistake with consequences. She felt proud, not boastful, of how she had handled herself. Evening approached, and she prepared for the next day. She organized her school supplies, laid out her clothes, and made sure everything was ready for another day of challenges and opportunities. The day had taught her much, but it had also reinforced her belief in her own abilities. She was capable of facing fear, intimidation, and uncertainty with calm, precision, and dignity. Before going to bed, she took a moment to reflect quietly. She knew that life would present more challenges, and that some people would always underestimate her, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them, to defend herself, and to maintain her dignity. Her resilience was not just about today. It was a lasting part of who she was, shaping her confidence, her intelligence, and her approach to life. Finally, as she drifted off to sleep, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The bullies had been humbled. The day's challenges had been met with grace, and she had proven to herself that she was strong,